it is so important to do applied scholarship. Yes, it may not reach academic medicine. However, there are many practitioners, faculty affairs practitioners around the world, that will find such scholarship very useful. Mm-hmm. And this is part of my dream of broadening the view of scholarship.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast. You won't believe who we have today, Dr. Paige S. Morahan. Yes, you know Dr. Morahan. You've heard her name mentioned. She is the founding director of ELAM, the Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine. This is a very prestigious program that many of us and our colleagues have attended and benefited from the programming and the networking. She's a microbiologist by training and a professor emeritus at Drexel. So let's hear from Dr. Morahan. Hi, Paige. How are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine, and I'm delighted to be here. I think podcasts are an innovative new scholarship area, and I've been very interested in broadening the view of scholarship for much of my career.
Thank you, Paige.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Would you please tell the listening audience a little bit about your background and how you got into faculty affairs and development?
Okay. First, who am I? You've already mentioned that I'm a founding director of ELAM, which is located at Drexel University. However, it is an international program. ELAM is now 25 years old, and the goal is to advance the number of women in leadership positions in medical, dental, public health, pharmacy, and other health profession schools, and also included NIH now and a few other health-related organizations. Our related goal is it's not enough to just increase the number of women for gender equity. We need to sustain their leadership. So we're also trying to do that. So that's two roles, Professor Emeritus of Immunology, Microbiology, and Founding Director of ELAM. And the third is Co-Founding Director of the FAMER Institute. FAMER is Foundation for Advancement of International Medical Education and Research, and it is a foundation within ECFMG, Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates. And it was formed, we're now in our 20th year in the FAMER Institute, and it was formed to provide capacity building and research involving medical schools worldwide. And it's based on ELAM model. Wow. So that's what I've been involved in. Now, you asked, how did I get here? It's been a convoluted journey. I have had multiple careers, Kim, and a love of learning. I'd say those are the key features. Multiple careers. I did multiple careers before. It's now we say that everyone is going to have at least 5 different careers in their lifetime. And so I already did that. I do wish I'd learned a little more about strategic career planning beforehand, earlier in my career, and I think that's why I'm still teaching strategic career planning, because I see how useful it is. So my first career was as a research lab technician at Rockefeller Institute in New York City. That was after I graduated from Agnes Scott College with a major in chemistry and did independent study in microbiology. So in that job, I fast learned that I wanted to do more. So I went to Hunter College part-time at night and was able to do my research on my day job. Took a part of, my boss was very kind and, gave me some mice, and so I could do my research for my master's there at my laboratory. And it was microbiology work. And so I completed the master's and realized that didn't mean you could lead a laboratory and decide what was going to be done. So I decided, okay, I need to go on for a PhD. You can see where the love of learning comes in, too.
Right.
And so I started in the microbiology department at Cornell Sloan Kettering, their PhD program. However, my advisor, who was then had moved over to virology, just took the chair after a year, took the chair of microbiology at what became the Medical College of Wisconsin. And so I had the choice, did I move with him or not? And moving would mean I'd have to leave that program and go to Mount Sinai because that was where another virologist in the area was. Bottom line is that moved to Milwaukee and got my PhD with Sid Grossberg. And I just had the pleasure of going back and speaking at MCW this October. It was a lot of fun. So that was my first career, research technician while going to graduate school.
Okay.
The second was the academic route, postdoc and faculty academic ladder. And so I think maybe it's because I got my PhD in a medical school or two medical schools that I gravitated towards that career. And this was at Virginia Commonwealth University. And so I did the usual teaching, research grants, active in research societies. But in retrospect, an important career element that was not strategic, I just did it, was that I took some graduate courses in education because I felt I needed to know a little more about the science of teaching since I was getting into it. So after about a decade in that academic life, I been wondering, what's next, and chairs were the next logical thing. So I started looking at chairs and was recruited to be chair of microbiology and immunology at the Medical College of Pennsylvania. So that's how I got to this area. So during that decade as chair, I continued to lead research grants. Those were the early days of biologic response modifiers, what's now known as immunotherapy. I continued being active in national societies, both scientific and education. For instance, I served on 2 committees for the National Board of Medical Examiners. And one of my pleasures was being the first woman president of our Society of Microbiology and Immunology Chairs. Another aspect of my career as chair was continuing that unconscious interest in teaching and learning. I held the first, our school hosted the first National Education Conference of the chairs of microbiology and immunology and the directors of their courses. And I was also part of a team that started a program in integrated learning at MCP, and that program lasted for over 20 years as a separate track for the first 2 years. It's just within about 2 years ago, it's merged into a new curriculum. So you can see the kind of interest in education followed me through. And then the other was important element during those years was that after about 7 years as chair, I said, I think I need to learn more about this. I've been kind of doing it by the seat of my pants, and so I took 3 leadership programs, which I wish I had done earlier. In retrospect, I did the double AMC short program for chairs and associate deans. I also did a week-long program from Harvard, their Management Development MDP program for department chairs. And that was really useful because it got me out of the medical school to see the broader view. And I realized, for instance, at that time that other schools were further ahead than this was now. I took that program in probably 1989, something like that. Medical schools were further behind at that time than other universities and colleges in looking at diversity. And then the third program I did was, which really led to a major change in my career to the fourth career, was being selected as an American Council on Education fellow, which again was that broader view of universities and colleges and community colleges and historic black colleges and religious colleges across the U.S. So that really catapulted me into as I said, my next career. One thing I learned during that AC fellowship was that I really admire people who are in student affairs, and there's no way that I wanted to take that on. However, faculty affairs, I became really intrigued with. Now, at that time, again, this was in 1992, there were a minority of schools at that time, medical schools, had offices of faculty affairs. So I had the opportunity when I came back to start an office of faculty affairs. And that's what I did. And so that led to this fourth career as Associate Provost for Faculty Affairs. And this period coincided with a very tumultuous period in the life of Medical College of Pennsylvania. We had just merged with the Allegheny Health System, and then this was followed by mergers with Hahnemann University and a number of hospitals. And I had three charges for this new Office of Faculty Affairs. One was to review the promotion and tenure guidelines for all the schools, because now suddenly we were bigger than a medical school. We had what then was known as allied health and graduate studies. Second was to start an internal leadership program because we were melding the cultures of Pittsburgh. Allegheny Health System was located there, in Philadelphia, very different, and then the different disciplines of medicine and nursing, and because that was another school, nursing and health professions, and then the hospitals that we had, all the different hospitals that were being merged. So that was a charge for the internal leadership program, and not a small charge. Right. And then the third was to start the ELAM program. The previous president, who was now Chancellor, Walter Cohen, had that as a dream, along with the Director of Development, Patty Cormier. And I was offered the opportunity to start this program, ELAM. And so we started it very much practice-based. It was based on my experience as a chair, my experience in these leadership programs, what parts did I like in the curriculum and thought were, useful, most useful. And only as ELAM evolved did I really become a leadership researcher, educator, and, first educating myself. So the theory came after the practice, which sometimes happens. And so did this for about a decade, during which we went through bankruptcy. So we had that other tumultuous and being bought in bankruptcy court by Drexel University, and then being a separate entity financially because Drexel didn't want us to be, pull them down, and then after 10 years becoming fully part of Drexel. So, all kinds of changes. We felt like we were the ideal people to teach ELAM because we knew what change was about. I can't tell you how many different letterheads and business cards there have been along the way. And during this period also, after the bankruptcy, I went part-time. So this is the fifth career. It's becoming an independent leadership and career consultant. So I continued my role as director of ELAM, and then went, as I said, went part-time. And this led to my being invited by Nancy Gary, who was on our advisory committee. And if people do not remember, I would like to remind people of an icon in our medical academic medical community, Nancy Gary, MD. She was the first woman to be dean of 2 different medical schools. And at the time she was on our advisory committee, she was president of ECFMG. And she liked what we had done with ELAM and thought we could do something like that at ECFMG, and that's how the Famer Institute came about. Was under her presidency. So that's kind of how I got to where I am for the last 25 years of being moving from a basic science researcher to a leadership educator and researcher and faculty affairs researcher.
Well, I definitely see that or hear the thread that we hear from so many of us in this field of that lifelong learning and just the diverse backgrounds from which we all come, and that something in us wanting to give back and seeing other faculty members, have struggles or maybe not have such a smooth ride, and us wanting to help smooth those rough seas for them. And so a lot of what you said, makes me think of, a lot of our stories, except that you've kind of done what a lot of us do, but you've done it like times 100. So I can't help but reflect on the 3 programs you built, the first one being when you were the department chair of microbiology, immunology, as well as Famer and ELAM. You mentioned that all 3 were over 2 decades old. And the fact that you built something that is that's so sustainable over 2 decades. I mean, because a lot of us, we can, we come up with programs and workshops and seminars or what have you, but, tell us more about how, what do you think what is it in you that is able to build programs that have that foundation, that have sustained time and bankruptcies and changes in leadership, and as you said, you put theory after practice. How, to what do you attribute the success of that program building skill that you have?
I think perseverance is a big one. I don't like to give up, which is, and certainly through the bankruptcy was an interesting period. Sometimes I can persevere and stay with something too long, and that's something I'm learning. I think persistence. Another one is being committed from the very beginning to doing evaluation on the programs. I'm not quite sure where that came from. I think maybe from my PhD background. I feel like it's very important if you're going to put effort into something, find out whether it worked and how you could make it better. So when we started ELAM, I had, as I said, I'd been through that Harvard MDP program, and the director of that program at the time was Sharon McDade, a leadership educator and researcher, and she had written a book on leadership. And so I recruited her, not with money, but for a collaborative effort to evaluate our program. She was on our advisory committee, so we developed a pre and post, the basic pre and post survey, beginning the first year of the program. At the end, not at the beginning of the program, but at the end, we had the fellows in the first year take the post survey, and then we used it the next year, and then the next year, and then we wrote a paper about it, showing that the fellows did believe they had learned something, statistically proven, and that was based on the objectives of the different units.
Right.
And then we were fortunate to garner a grant from a local foundation to add some more evaluation and continue it, and get some money for our evaluation group. And then we were fortunate, and with Nancy Gary's help, to get a large grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Wow.
And through it wasn't enough to do what we wanted. And my co-director, Roz Richmond, who is a fundraiser par excellence, was able to garner 4 additional gifts. One from when ELAM started, we were started with a grant from the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund. And so we went back to them and got some funds that we added to the Robert Wood Johnson grant, along with gifts from 3 schools to have a robust enough financial package to do a longitudinal pre and post survey for several classes, and to do some qualitative interviews, follow-up interviews. Then we were also fortunate to, we were one of the, I think it was 14 schools that obtained grants in the NIH competition. The one time they've had a call for grants dealing with advancement of women. And that we have just published our last paper from that grant. We just heard it was accepted at the Journal of Women's Health. It will be in the August issue. And then we also got a grant from the Sloan Foundation, and we're just finishing up our research with that. Wow. So, and there have been smaller grants along the way, but you can see that I have a persistence, documentation, proving you've had an effect, learning from what needs to be changed. I think those have all been part of success of the program.
Yes, definitely. I've been serving on the Group on Faculty Affairs Research and Scholarship Committee for several years now, and that's certainly near and dear to all of our committee members' hearts, and we've recently begun offering workshops on how to conduct research and program evaluation in faculty affairs, and how to publish in faculty affairs and faculty development. And actually part of the service for the facultyfactory.org website is we're trying to compile and archive faculty affairs and faculty development scholarship, so that we can have a one-stop shop where folks can go to facultyfactory.org and search on mentorship or women or leadership, because we know that in our space, the premier journal being academic medicine, well, it's so difficult for us to get in, many of us to get into academic medicine, that we try to find different channels and routes to publish our work, and then it makes it even more difficult sometimes to find all these contributions. So we're trying to archive, in the community, the AAMC Group on Faculty Affairs, trying to have one place where we can help each other out by not only providing, best practices or evidence for what we do, but then help encourage and inspire and kind of use what is out there for networking and more collaborations and building future opportunities and maybe projects from that. So I appreciate that, and definitely share your enthusiasm for data and evidence and evaluation.
I don't know. On research with faculty affairs, I don't know whether Kim, that I spearheaded the first national survey of the status of faculty affairs and faculty development offices using the EEMC database.
Now was yours the first one, and that said then the Roberta Cennino et al. Did?
Yes.
Well, guess what? This feels like it's full circle, Paige, because guess who's leading off the third iteration of your work? Me.
Oh, great.
So isn't this full circle? Yeah, that you started it, and I'm picking up the mantle, and we're getting into the next iteration of the next 10 years of faculty affairs and development offices. So, here you go.
Right, right. So that was one thing I brought in, and I was involved in faculty affairs before it was a formal group.
Right.
I was chair of the meeting, I think, a year or 2 years before it became a formal group. So I have really a love for faculty affairs, as you can see. I also was involved with early paper on using the logic model to document the effectiveness of faculty affairs offices. So that goes back to what you were saying, and that it is so important to do applied scholarship. Yes, it may not reach academic medicine. However, there are many practitioners, faculty affairs practitioners around the world, that will find such scholarship very useful. And this is part of my dream of broadening the view of scholarship is, if you're going to do something, make it be a scholarly project and publish it so that it's useful for the community.
That's right. That's right, because we spend so much time thinking about and brainstorming and coming up with these programs and investing in tools and materials and the recruitment and the time and the space and the administrative effort. And if we were to just kind of pause for a moment and think, okay, and have that be a question all the time, and how are we going to measure this? And how are we going to measure this? And how are we going to know we're making a difference? And how might we make an impact? And who cares? And who needs to be on our team to support this? That is just that moment there of doing something, I think, really lends credibility. And certainly you're building 3 programs that now are still in existence after 2 decades. Demonstrates that something built on solid ground has more staying power versus, just whipping something together and maybe not looking at it carefully and changing things and drastically every year such that you can't really measure any impact. It requires some amount of thought and some amount of familiarity with a program evaluation constructs, or as you mentioned, logic models. And if we don't have that expertise, there are many of us in the community who do. And so we're such a tight group in the AAMC group on faculty affairs. It wouldn't take much, something simple as an inquiry on the GFA listserv saying, starting a new program, calling all program evaluators who wants to be involved in this. And I'm sure we're a very generous group.
Right. You're correct, Kim. It is a different set of research skills.
Right.
I came out of the world where I did not know there was another research design other than randomized experimental. I worked with mice or cell culture, nice control or more controlled situations. And so I had to move from the laboratory controlled randomized experimental research to the messy arena of research with human subjects and mixed methods. And I have to say, having been in both worlds, I shudder at my early days as a microbiology chair when I said, let's just do a survey. We can do a survey, whip it out in half a day and send it to people.
Yeah.
And I now realize that survey design is just as precise as doing a molecular biology protocol.
You're right.
However, unfortunately, many of the experimental researchers do not realize that. They don't realize they have a bias against qualitative research.
Yes.
So, at any rate, that's. There was another. There was something else you mentioned, but it's gone out of mind for the moment.
Maybe it'll come back. I'm curious about your the 5 careers as you described them, and kind of walked us through your path of going from research technician to traditional academia to a chair to the leadership programs that really changed your direction, and then ultimately as an associate provost. Because of course now armchair quarterbacking this, you did mention a couple times you wish you had fill in the blank, taken leadership courses early on. You wish you had known a little bit more about strategic career planning. And yet, obviously this worked out really well for you. I mean, there are no obvious snafus or big gaffes, but recalling this path and this journey, was there any point in time where you did have doubts and you felt like you were really struggling with the decision to stay in academia versus going into leadership roles? Because it sounded like you're like, well, it was 7 years, and I thought, well, what else? Or then it was 10 years, and I thought, what else? Do you feel like that's a natural, organic rhythm to life, that about 7-10 years, one starts thinking, what's next? Or is it unique to Paige Morahan? Or is it unique to scientists and academicians that we have that bug for learning more and doing more?
I think that it's a natural rhythm. We have the movie The 7-Year Itch.
Right.
And I think it's based on some nature. I think it's marvelous when someone has such a passion for a research area that they stay with it and are excited for 30, 40 years. And I do have colleagues that are that way. However, I think what happened for me was I began to see the broader picture. And part of this was being part of all this mergers and acquisitions and bankruptcy. And I saw how context and the environment affect what you can do. And so I found myself reading. Here's one kind of tip that I give in career counseling is watch what you pick up to read professionally, that you pick up to read. And I didn't realize at the time, but something was changing when I would have to force myself to read the Journal of Immunology in order to get a grant written. However, I would pick up the New England Journal every week, or began picking up the Harvard Business Review and the Chronicle of Higher Education, so that I was beginning to see the world more broadly. And I think that's a general fact as one matures and goes through phases of life.
So may I interrupt? So you're saying that this is interesting. You said that watch what you pick up to read. So my head went two ways. At first, I thought you were going to say, watch what you pick up to read. Like, what is my hand? So we all have desks with stuff everywhere and stacks and journals that we think we're going to get to and read. So when I have a minute and I'm trying to cram some salad down my throat, and I'll watch where my hand goes, what do I gravitate to because I want to versus I have to? But then you said something that made me think, oh, wait a minute. Does she mean watch what I read and how I experience that reading? So there are, like you said, some things I'm in the gerontology field where I look through my journals of gerontology, the gerontologist, and I read through things. And yet inevitably, like you, when I pick up academic medicine, the Journal of Faculty Development and Harvard Business Review, I, kind of tear through it, and I'm hungry and I'm thirsty, and my eyes I can feel my eyes get big, and I just want to read it really fast, and I'm just thirsty for that. So I think you mean both of those, that you're telling
both,
yourself something when you like, okay, Kim, stop, look you just got all excited when you started reading those, and you're kind of like yawn with something else.
The magazine that does that for me now is Change. Magazine you may never heard of, but I encourage faculty affairs people to put it in their list. It's a magazine about higher ed, broad magazine, and it quite often has faculty development, faculty affairs type articles in it.
I've never heard of it. Change. Do you know what regularity it comes out, or who publishes it?
Like 6 times a year. Let's see. Wait a minute.
It's not Change Management, right? No.
No. It's called Change.
Change.
It's the legacy of a group on faculty that was in existence when I first became associate provost, and that organization went out of business, but this magazine still persists.
Huh.
I'm trying to see whether I've got one in my reading. Doesn't look like I do, which shows I'm keeping up to date with it.
I'll definitely have to look it up. We'll all have to look up Change, and maybe you'll come across it as we're chatting here.
Yeah, I have one other place I'm looking, but I'm pretty sure I've got one in. Yes.
Oh, great.
Change, the magazine of higher learning. And for instance, this was the November-December issue in 2019. And the one that really struck me was hashtag pedagogies, improving literacy and course relevance through social media metaphors. And this history professor used Instagram. And it's really remarkable what he was able to do. And then there's another, the art of designing a curriculum optimized for learning transfer. Looking below the surface to close achievement gaps and improve career readiness skills.
Wow. Yeah.
And then another one looking at evaluation. Common data, unconscious use, uncommon use. Dining hall meal swipes predict retention and graduation.
Oh, geez.
So, there's always something fascinating in it, and that made me think about, are there markers like that to use for faculty?
Exactly. Yeah,
right.
I think
so I encourage you.
Change, the magazine of higher learning. I wish we had the luxury of resources at our institutions to host us to do sabbaticals in other industries, because I'm the same way with reading anything, HBR, Harvard Business Review, and anything in business, entrepreneur. I love these because I always feel like they're, leap years ahead of our thinking, and inevitably every article I read, I'm like, oh my gosh, we could, if you just pop in faculty development, or we could really, crosswalk that.
Exactly.
And so it's so exciting to just step out of our comfort zones and go to see how is everybody else doing this kind of stuff.
To finish up with Change, since I've got it in front of me now, it's the editorial home of Change is CHEA, the Council for Higher Education Accreditation.
Council for Higher Education Accreditation, CHEA, C-H-E-A. So it's for all traditional higher education.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
And it's published by Routledge, Taylor, and Francis Group.
There you go, folks. Have a new source for us to look at.
That's the one I...
Now, we talked to, Nancy Spector back in, I think it was, I talked to her back in the spring, and executive director of ELAM, and she said of you, Paige always says you need to do leadership training at every stage of your career. And I can't help but notice that that's just been your mantra throughout every stage of your career, because everything you talked about how you sought out more training. When you were a postdoc, you purposely sought out, I want to learn more about education. And when you were the chair, I want to learn more about leadership. So, and then the ACE Fellowship, so on and on and on. And what advice would you give to folks just now starting off in faculty affairs or development, or even faculty members who might be listening to this and think, well, that's nice that you have that curiosity, but in academic medicine has changed, and we don't have time for this, and these things take time and resources and money, and I'm too busy taking care of patients and charting an epic and writing grants and writing papers, and this is just pie in the sky. It's undoable. What are your thoughts on that kind of a retort?
I think if you don't get out of your rut, you're going to stay there. And you may be at risk when a new owner comes or whatever, because you don't know the broader picture. So I think there's a risk in doing that you have to take some time to learn the skills that are, not microbiology, how to grow cell culture, to know how to network. I did not know how to network effectively. I now teach, introverts how they can network. and make it doable. So there definitely are skills, and these soft skills are important. We are unfortunately acculturated, Kim, that they're not important, and that's one of the I think one of the deficits of our culture in academic medicine. So I would say these days it is so easy to at least get the broad knowledge. You've got podcasts, you've got YouTube, all over. And nothing can replace face-to-face developing trust-based relationships with people. And that requires face-to-face. Now, you can maintain it once you develop it. You can maintain it long distance. I am part of a group that did some training called organizational training in the early 90s. There are now 6 of us in the group from Canada and the U.S. We meet weekly by phone.
Weekly?
We didn't initially, when it was not as easy to do phone calls the way it is now. We did. I would set up, because I was in a medical school and could set up a conference call, and we met like every 6 weeks. And we have only seen each other face to face 2 times since '93.
Oh my gosh!
But I can tell you, it is a very close community.
Yeah.
So spend the time to develop trust, and then you can keep it, and you can get booster shots by seeing people. However, these days, with FaceTime and Zoom and Skype, one can have almost the same type of thing. Not quite, but almost. So I think it's imperative. Let me give you another example. In the early days of being associate provost and leader of ELAM, I would get annoyed. Remember, we were in this tumultuous environment. We would have, deans come and go, and provosts come and go, and presidents come and go. And so each one that came, I would have to spend time educating them. Yes. Why is it important to support ELAM? And I would be annoyed. I just want to do my job. And I finally had a mindset shift that was part of my job, that a good 10 to 20% part of my job was educating the new regime.
Wow.
And so I had to accept that. That's part of the job, just like, writing a human subjects protocol. You may not want to do it, and you have to do it. And so that really helped me. And I think that mindset shift needs to happen in early careers, that it is important to spend some time educating yourself in the leadership and managerial skills that you need to get your job done, and to develop the network, and to spend a little time reflecting, is this what I want to do for the next 20 years? How do I want to contribute to the world?
Yeah. Well, that's I think what you're talking about, and is this strategic career planning that you are now expert at, and spend some time in your consulting practice. And what you just said resonates with me perfectly, because I too, as an associate dean at Hopkins, we have senior associate deans and the vice dean. And although our vice dean, Dr. Janice Clements, has been around for, I think over 30 years, in her vice dean role, not that long, obviously. But the senior associate deans who've been at Hopkins, 25, also 30 years, and rotate through those leadership positions, I too was getting all harumphy that, oh, here we go. Now there's going to be another senior associate dean for faculty development, and I have to inform him or her, this is how the Office of Faculty Development runs, this is what we do. And part of me was getting a little resentful of, like you said, I felt like, I'm too busy. Shouldn't they just kind of say, and Kim, runs the day-to-day of the Office of Faculty Development. She's good, she'll let you know what's going on when you need to know something, and just basically get out of the way. And it's just such an obnoxious attitude that I had. But when you just said that, it made me realize, yeah, Kim, you need to get off your high horse and recognize that part of the job is just good old communication, good old meet and greet, good old getting people to know you, to understand you in your office, to get a feel for who they are and what matters to them and understand them. And it's a very humbling message, but you're right, because we're all so busy that the idea of every year we get a new head of faculty senate, and the faculty senate works really closely with our Office of Faculty Development. We're hand in glove, and every year there are elections and there's a new president or chair of faculty senate. And every year I get the inevitable, I'd like to get together with you and learn about our 3,000 faculty and what they want and what your office does. And I go, But
no,
you're exactly right.
View it as a term I coined about the third year in ELAM, graceful self-promotion.
The art of graceful self-promotion. I remember Luann Thorndike came and gave us that. I love it.
Yeah.
Art of
And it is very important. You can't expect people to know what you're doing.
Right.
Particularly not in this fast-moving world of ours. Back to help for faculty. This may not be for the very junior faculty, but once you get into a role like chair or associate dean as you are, another place to get that broader perspective is through an executive coach.
Yes.
And we really encourage an ELAM for any woman going to a leadership position to negotiate an executive coach as part of the package.
Yeah.
Because that can give you that external perspective that you need. And I am pleased. One of the things I'm pleased about is that we help start executive coaching as a useful modality in academic health centers. It was maybe within 5 years of forming ELAM, a number of the faculty, we got together and we wrote a letter, drafted a letter, and put together bios of all of us and sent it to all the deans, called the ELAM Alliance, which is now no longer in effect, but the concept is still there. And so I'm happy to know now that many medical schools, not a majority yet, but many, routinely offer leaders an executive coach as part of the package.
That's right.
And
right. That perspective of someone who is just outside of your culture, but has enough of an experience with the importance of culture and emotional intelligence and some guideposts and a perspective to slow us down, calm us down, and obviously good advice too. It's invaluable. I remember when I was interviewing for my Hopkins job here almost 7 years ago, I met up with Laura Schweitzer. And Laura was, I call her my coach, and I met her through the AAMC Mid-Career Women's Program, and that her advice was just invaluable. And I remember feeling like a little puppy dog whose head goes, what? When I called to tell her I got the job, she's like, that's wonderful, Kim, congratulations. Now, what's your exit strategy? And I went, what? My exit strategy? I'm not even there yet. You're talking about an exit strategy. And she laughed. She said, nope, you have to have an exit strategy. And it was just interesting that she planted that seed. But that I thought, oh my gosh, I never in a million years would have thought as soon as you're accepting a job, it's just this big picture, just this kind of pull back, what is next step and where if things go south quickly or, it was a reassuring also in a way to, not that I was nervous, but thinking, okay, this is good to know that this is a thing that's a good idea to have a safety net.
Yep. So, and Laura Schweitzer is superb.
Oh yeah.
Person for you to have worked with. I think that. So anyway, that's one legacy that I'm pleased with. That executive coaching is now, part of the normal academic health center, a panoply of leadership approaches.
Fantastic.
I think one other thing that I'm particularly pleased about with ELAM, we haven't gone as far as we could, or FAMR, is fostering, including diversity and inclusion, cultural sensitivity, and understanding implicit bias. So as far as I know, I believe we're still the only national program that has a full day of programming on diversity and inclusion.
Wow.
Includes some role playing where people have to get into roles, and so it can be challenging. And in FAMR, we were able to do it initially because, frankly, the MDs and the organization didn't think it was necessary. But I realized that we were Eurocentric. I mean, you are American-centric. And so when we were able to, we brought in the concept of cultural sensitivity, and we're now much more culturally sensitive than we were when we first began.
Sure.
Just simple things like having 2 separate tables, one for food, one for the vegetarians, so that the ladles in the meat don't get into the the ladles for the vegetarians. Having a prayer room for the Muslims, and just some simple things like that, as well as things that take more emotional effort.
Yeah.
But as we move, this is an area that if I'm moving into my 6th career, if you will, this is an area that I am really focusing on, is diversity and inclusion, gender equity, treating everyone with respect. As we move into a world that's more global and diverse, we must have these skills and begin to look at our implicit assumptions that we all have. For instance, that assumption that experimental randomized research is the gold standard, and if you can't do that, it's really not worth doing.
Right.
I can't tell you how often I have come across that in this new world. When we do as rigorous a study like having stratified groups, so we have groups matched to their school, groups that a cohort that went to leadership programs, a cohort of women who did not, and the cohort of men at the same school, appointed assistant professor at the same year, or associate professor, and then following from the AAC database, when did they get promoted? And people say, you need to do a randomized study, to see if these programs are useful.
Yeah.
And I've had that from a reviewer.
Yeah.
Shows totally lack of understanding.
That's right. You cannot. We learn in the applied social science, and you can in nonprofit. I worked for a while at Penn State in running an applied research center. It was the same thing. There's an ethical component to randomizing some kids to this beneficial or perceived to be beneficial treatment, and then not. It's not that easy. They're not rats.
Right. And it's not appropriate.
Right.
But people, so that's a bias, and another bias, that's the implicit assumption that the your American way of doing things is the best.
Is the
and
only way.
I've really been honored by being part of the FAMR program, and seeing that what many of these countries are doing is as good or better. Like in Brazil, they get students into the community earlier than we do, and have them do substantive things for 6 years.
Oh my goodness!
Following a family. So think what that could do to American healthcare if you had something like that.
Wow.
And then of course, teaching learning methods. We still have the implicit assumption, those of us that grew up in the day of lectures, that lectures are really the best, and it's a whole other world to learn interactive teaching methods that and to show they're effective, and to be willing to take those risks and try. And that's why I'm delighted to be on a podcast as an example of something like that. I think the final thing I wanted to say, Kim, is something you probably don't know, is that I've combined my artistic photographic interest with my career wherever I can. And that's also going to be part of my sixth career. I have a local photo show that's going to open on March 20th. So I started, the way I've incorporated this, and Roberta Sanino and I have thought about writing a column on this, is I created a series of electronic cards, which are my images with writing on them, to send for congratulations or happy birthday, because you cannot send something snail mail to Uganda and expect it to get there in any decent time. So, I had to do that. And then I've created an annual calendar, pages around the world, that I create, and the profits go to help support FAMR.
Oh my gosh, pages around the world. I love it. Jeez, does your creativity have no bounds? This
well, if you have a name like this, you make use of it.
Well, of course, I love it. And, folks, this is a good example for what happens when you give a scientist a mouse. Look at what she did. Her mentor gave her a mouse and set her on her way. And now, all these years later, look at what she's done. So I love your story. I learned a lot from you, and I love the idea of you, your artistic bend and your creativity. And I just think this is wonderful, and I really appreciate you sharing your time and encouraging and inspiring us in the faculty affairs and faculty development community. Folks, you've been listening to Dr. Paige Morahan, the founding director of ELAM, Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine. You can find out more about her on the facultyfactory.org website, and her email address is pm36@drexel.edu, and she is a consultant and can give you lots of advice on all the things we've talked about today. So, Paige, any parting thoughts or words or anything to our family out there?
No, I think that the three final messages are: create applied scholarship out of your faculty affairs and faculty development work, and evaluate your program, and become aware of your implicit assumptions.
Wow.
As you do your work.
Perfect. There you have it. One of the pros. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more. Get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.